Hello everyone and welcome to this TELedvisors webinar. Today we're looking at learning technologists, what they actually do. What do they know? What do they do? What's the difference between edtechs and learning designers? How do we work together? How do we find the best people for the job? Today we're joined by, well, myself, Colin Simpson, Kim Schutz from University of Adelaide, Joe Hayes from Monash University, and Elaine Huber from the University of Sydney. So Elaine Huber is the Director of Educational Development at the Sydney University Business School. She leads a team of learning technologists, learning designers, researchers and educational developers working together on a project called, I'm going to say CLAS, C-L-A-S, Connected Learning at Scale. She started her higher ed career at Macquarie Uni as an educational developer, then went on to head up the ed development team, hired online educational designers, did a PhD in educational evaluation, moved to UTS into a senior lecturer role in the Central Learning and Teaching Unit where she built a team of learning technologists, moved into a faculty and led a team of academic learning designers, and then recently moved to the University of Sydney. So why don't you kick us off, Elaine?
Thanks, Colin. This my little section just came about from a post that I put in the TELedvisors forum around the name of the role. And basically what happened was I'm hiring a new team, and the role name was already decided before I came along, and the title of the role was Educational Technologist. And I had a look at the criteria, and when we went to interview, I was saying to my boss, maybe we should have called this Learning Designer or something that's a bit more common or wider used at the moment. Anyway, basically we had 2 positions available, and we only got 8 applicants for these 2 positions. And we wondered, and the people who did apply, a couple of them met the criteria, but the majority of them didn't. And so we ended up not interviewing, and we're going back to market. And we've actually kept the same criteria, but we've changed the name to Learning Technologist. And I've had a little bit of a conversation with Colin, and we thought we'd use this title just to instigate a bit of conversation around whether the title of the role influences people in any way in terms of what they apply for. And I'll give you an example. We did have we had 2 educational technologists and a senior educational technologist role. And the person we ended up giving the role to wasn't happy about the title of the role and has asked if we can change it to Learning Designer. And that person felt that there's perhaps a little bit of a stigma around learning educational technologist, and that they would be thought of as someone who was the technologist or the help desk person or the person that fixed the IT, whereas that particular person had quite a lot of pedagogy and postgraduate education background, and is interested in changing the title of the role, which we can do because realistically the title of the role isn't that important, but perhaps it is. So I've got a couple of questions on there to pose to the group, and we can either answer those questions in the chat or we can do that verbally if you want to, if there's time. We can also bring in some of the content that the previous presenters have used. But I'm just interested to hear to only get 8 applications for 2 positions seems to me that either the market is deplete within the Sydney area and people don't want to move to Sydney for such a role, or there was something about the role or the advertisement that people were just not interested in, or, it could be a whole range of things. I will just put the next slide. Oh, and the other, I'll put the slide up with all of the criteria. So you can see, actually I'll put that up now. So that you can see these are the criteria that we were asking people, and they do talk about technology quite heavily. But, you know, what are your thoughts? Do you think this is a learning designer role? Is this a learning technologist or educational technologist role? Or any other questions that you'd like to ask? And that little bit.ly URL up at the top is the new, if you're interested in applying or you know somebody who might be, that's the link to the job.
Okay, so if anyone wants to pipe in with their microphone. Oh, there we go. Yeah, actually, yeah, maybe raising hands is a good way to go. Do you want to speak? Yeah, you've got a microphone, Kerry. Off you go.
Hi. Starting with the second bullet point, not an experience in implementing emerging technology-informed innovations in teaching and learning. Implementation would apply a level of technology-based project management that isn't a part of my everyday role because I work at a larger institution now. When I worked at a smaller institution, I not only had to be a learning designer, but I also had to support students and work on implementation and upgrades. So I think that would have been off-putting to me if I'd looked at that role. If I were based in Sydney and interested in changing jobs, I'd be worried about the implementation wording around that. Identify and apply technology for continuous innovation. Again, I would say that to me indicates a higher level role than education designer, and reading that as a educational designer / learning designer, it seems to me like you're trying to get an educational technologist and a learning designer rolled into one for what you're offering. So yeah, I think this is written as being more of a learning or educational technologist role than it is a learning designer role, because there's just not designing and developing engaging learning activities, experience adapting designing applications. That's my role, but the other ones bleed so far into, some of it bleeds into IT support, and a lot of it is educational technology that I wouldn't have applied for it.
Okay, thanks, Kerry. And you're right, it is a PD that was written for a learning technologist, not a learning designer. But I just wonder whether that was my question. Is why, you know, are there fewer and fewer learning technologists out there? Do people prefer to be learning designers, or prefer
I think because it varies, perhaps in a job advertisement, it would be helpful to say, here's our ecosystem, here's where this role fits.
Yeah, that's true. And there is a lot more information, obviously, in the job applications and background and the project and everything else. Anyone else got any thoughts? I'll flick back to the questions, because the other question was, we do have an academic researcher position as well in learning technologies. That would perhaps be more of interest to someone who wants to go down the research path. Other thoughts? Who else?
Sorry, I was just going to say I might read out some of the comments from the chat because they don't actually appear in the recording. So Annie said, technologist to me means technology primarily and not as much about design. Hank has said, many educational technologists prefer to be learning designers in my experience. I think it is about the connotation of the title. I have certain feelings about that statement, but I'll come back to that. Kim, yeah, Kim thinks it's the word technologist equals IT. Joe says that traditionally technologists are perceived as working at a lower level to designers, which is not necessarily true in my experience. I assume you mean like a Hugh level or like a pay grade. Hank is saying we had a lot of applications for learning designers at QUT. Brian, this is an ongoing issue for all non-academic support roles, whether they are learning techs or learning designers, sometimes perceived as tech support and educational expertise, sometimes overlooked, and there's a lot of discussion of that in the literature. Wendy asks, what percentage of the role is tech versus learning design? AP says...
In terms of the percentage, and to me, I've had a lot of people into all these kinds of roles over many years, and really it depends on the skills of the people who you end up recruiting. And I'm always encouraging, you know, for people to grow, and if you don't have the educational or pedagogical background, then, you know, definitely move towards that or get some of that, or if you don't have as much of the technical skills, then move towards that and get some of that, because I think you need both. So there's no set percentage. Joe, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I was just a comment. I think that's a really good point. I think it's already starting to happen, and I think we can expect in the future that technologists and designers, like the roles and responsibilities of those two positions, they're just going to get closer and closer. So yeah, just to agree with what you just said.
Yeah. I like Murray's comment there, his suggestion, call it a, what was it, educational technology designer, or a learning design technologist, from Kim. Kim, did you want to say something?
Yeah, one thing I didn't mention in my talk, which is, I guess it's maybe relevant, is I guess here I've found the learning designers, they tend to have a background as a teacher, which I happen to have, but they would all need it. But they also tend to be bigger picture curriculum focused here. This is at our university, whereas I think there's a role for the educational technologist here to really design shorter interactive activities, interactives as I called them. So that was something I thought was really important, the ability to develop really short, good pedagogical activities at in the small scale, whereas the learning designers might be larger scale. That's it.
Thanks. Does anyone want to ask the previous presenters some questions? Was there anything from earlier that?
I might just grab a couple that I collected from the chat. So one that was asked of, I'm guessing it was Kim's role. Meredith asked, are these all professional staff roles or a mixture of academic and professional staff?
Kim?
I was going to type it, but all except the academic stuff. Well, I can't remember my table now, but it was all professional staff except for the academic. Yes. So learning designers were not under the academic group; they were under professional staff.
Yeah, there was a comment from Kerry around the LDs didn't look like they were expert users of social media, but then I think you made some comments in the chat around that.
Yeah, I'll just add into that. That was at our organisation. We've been a bit because we're not that much into online. We have some risk and security. What's the word for it? Policies that really make it sort of discourage formal use of stuff like Facebook. Whereas I can understand there's reasons you might want to use them. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And I guess one for Joe was Elaine mentioned that she had found that if you have a good relationship, you can work around systems and gain buy-in. And I guess my question was, how much of that working around the systems happens, and is that does that cause other problems potentially? Because I imagine that it does.
Yeah, you've got to be careful. It is tricky. You can't let the relationship, I guess, circumvent the process. But just in my experience, I've found some of those admin and reference group meetings are so kind of formal and almost standoffish selfish, or they can be that way anyway. It just helps to maybe, grab lunch occasionally with the people that you're going to be working with these meetings. It kind of smooths the path to an easier conversation, if I can put it that way.
Thanks, Joe. Just a note that we'll have another. Usually our sessions, just before I let Colin wrap up, I'll just do a quick wrap up. That usually our sessions happen every third Thursday of the month. So there'll be another one happening soon.
Final Thursday.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to? I'll just let you go, Colin, because you're probably.
Sorry, that's all right. Thank you, Kate. This has been a really fantastic session, and we are at time. So I'm aware that people need to get off and go back and exist in the working world. There are still some fantastic questions up in the chat, so I'll try and capture this and share these in the discussion forum on the TELedvisors site. So we've got some information there about how you can get further involved if you're not already. I'd like to thank all of the speakers. I think there's a lot that still can be discussed. My personal perspective is that maybe there's a stigma against learning technologists, but instead of accepting that, perhaps we need to actually try and work against that. So the next, the TELedvisor webinars are generally the final Thursday of the month. So Kate's actually in the process of organising one for then. Information will be made available about that shortly. So again, if you can just show your appreciation for everyone in the chat, and I'll end the session. Thank you.